This film will introduce you to the concept of a national tourism trail of Genestreaming journey sculptures which celebrate culture, conservation and science across our incredible continent. As much as it is the role of the field naturalist artist to make science visible through art, it is the purpose of this artistic project to connect people to country, which fortifies communities with a shared purpose of conservation in their region.
My name's Ben Beeton. I make art on the ecology, geology and deep time history of natural systems. For many years I'd been creating artist residency projects for myself, working with ecotourism organisations. After my work in Central Australia, I wanted to follow one of the big shapes in Australia, so I set myself the task of following the Lewin Current. I started up in the Kimberley and worked my way down, doing many artist residency projects. One of the themes that occurred again and again through these residencies was that so many species were in decline, so many natural systems had been damaged. Eventually I got to Albany, Gondwana Link, and met Keith Bradbury. Keith was talking about ecological and cultural restoration, and I'd never heard things framed in that way before. I met Nathan McCoy, the ecologist at the Fitzgerald, and he was talking about connectivity and environmental and cultural connectivity, and I'd never heard things talked about in that kind of way before. And then I met Professor Steve Hopper. He told me about the Ockbills and the Yodfells, these old climatically buffeted infertile landscapes, and these young, often disturbed fertile landscapes, and opened up this vision of 250 million years of plant evolution to me in the southwest. So with all of these ideas, I began my residency project in Albany.
The number one threat to sending species into extinction is the fragmentation of natural systems through land clearing. And the only solution to species decline is to end land clearing and increase revegetation programs across the continent. In 2017, I therefore visited Albany to learn from the Gondwana Link organisation as to how they approach revegetation programs at scale. During this time, I met Noongar elder Arnie Carroll Peterson, who showed me a map of Dr. Noel Nanup's dreaming trails of the southwest, and she asked me if there could be some way, if a sculpture could be developed that would act as the foundation for a national tourism trail. The idea is that this particular sculpture would bring together culture, conservation and science. But how to do this? I developed the design for the sculpture during my time at the Australian National University, whilst developing the Genestreaming tools, which were virtual reality tools which engage students with conservation through an immersive experience of the Tree of Life.
Think of it this way. A gene pool is of the moment. It's like a photograph, but a gene stream is the sum of those gene pools through deep time. It's very important that we keep the gene streams flowing, and that's the message in this sculpture. Each gene stream is unique, and so to think of ourselves as being able to comprehend that and then become custodians of that, that to me is very, very important.
The eventual design of the sculpture used an evolutionary tree to showcase Aboriginal artists' work on the outside of the sculpture and field naturalists' artwork on the inside of the sculpture. The external art is always created by First Nations artists who have a connection to the specific region where the sculpture is being placed, and the internal art is always overseen by the Art of Nature School, being scientific illustrator Marley Moyer and myself. Visitors to the sculpture had the opportunity to admire the Indigenous art on the outside and then walk in and appreciate the field naturalist artwork on the inside. And when they walked into it, on the base plate of the sculpture, they beheld an evolutionary tree of shared ancestry, representing threatened species, endangered species, and endemic species to that specific region.
I went back to my friend Gary Muir at this time from WOW Wilderness Tours, who I'd worked on in my Valley of Giants residency. And Gary is really responsible for so much of the research on the deep time connections here. And Jenny Wilson had introduced me to a means of dyeing with native plants that to me look like fossils of the future. So here we have fossils of the past and fossils of the future. It's all inside this sculpture. but on the outside, it's like a flower, which is interesting. I didn't mean for that to happen. Someone said, "Oh, it's like a flower. It's like a Proteacean flower," and I said, "Well, how about that? It is." But the idea of the flower is where we talk about cultural restoration, where the traditional owners create the art for the outside of the sculpture. So each part of that has its own story, and Arnie Carroll project managed that part of the work. So when we had all of the artwork from the various contributing artists, we printed it out on the aluminium and we slid it into this shell, which is like a flower, but it's a flower of life, it's a flower of deep time, it's a flower of evolution.
At the entrance point itself, the visitor to the sculpture came to represent the whole of humanity. So you could see where we shared common ancestry with a whole myriad of species. On the one hand, of course, this form of artwork is very scientific, but on the other hand, it's embracing culture and the arts. We called the sculptures the Genestreaming journey sculptures. Everybody has their own Genestreaming journey. The name references the science of mapping heredity from family trees to evolutionary trees. The journey also refers to the journeys that the First Nations peoples took. So when we ask someone, "What's your Genestreaming journey?" it's certainly something to think about. We opened the first sculpture in the Twin Creeks Nature Reserve near the Porongrups in Western Australia in 2021. This was a resounding success, and we then opened a second sculpture in the Bunya Mountains in Queensland in 2022. Again, it was a huge success. We also experimented with the capacity to create augmented reality sculptures, firstly at Mount Magnet, then at Calabaran, and then at Alice Springs. We've opened a Genestreaming journey sculpture at Singapore Gardens by the Bay in partnership with the Toowoomba Regional Council. It is expected to have over 700,000 visitors, and it was quite incredible to be there at the opening to appreciate the queues of people lining up to see their photos taken inside the sculptures. In the southwest, in partnership with the Gondwana Link organisation, the first trail of Genestreaming journey sculptures. This trail will commence at Kings Park, then move down to Capel, then Northcliffe, Denmark, the Porongrups, this is the first sculpture, then Bremer Bay, Ravensthorpe, Wave Rock and Calabaran.
If you're a culture that's insular, that just exists inside its cities, that doesn't understand its deep time heritage, then you're in trouble. You're in big trouble. I've heard people say, those who forget the past that are condemned to repeat it, but those who do not comprehend or understand the deep time history of landscape and environment are also in big trouble with the technologies that we have today. We see ourselves as part of this incredible unfolding life that has been growing through space and time for many, many hundreds of millions of years, in fact, billions of years on this planet.
This project is about cultural and ecological connectivity. If you're a member of a community somewhere and you've seen this film, we're really looking for people like you who want to get involved to step forward and work with us to work in your community, in your region, and develop further sculptures. The importance of the people on the ground is absolutely critical to a project such as this. We'd love to hear from you. It's about bringing communities together and heightening an awareness of caring for country. We can't do it individually, but if we work together across communities, we can. This is what this project represents, and the sculptures are an integral part of telling that deep time story of connections to country.